Hey, my name is Bro, and I want to tell you a little story. So, our last two topics were a little bit heavy with what was essentially a career created off of yellow face and some weird acts between humans and not humans. So, I thought I would take it a little bit easier on you today and we would talk about cereal. With all of my videos, I tried to find a related shirt. This is the best I could do. I'm pretty sure this is a woman's shirt, and it's very odd. I don't know why it says the word finish up here. And next to the picture of cereal, it just says food. Next to what appears to be pumpkin seeds, it says nut. Next to almonds, it says peanuts. The raspberry says pomegranate. And for some reason, the yogurt says milk branding. I tried my best. And so, a little disclaimer, I know in the last video I said I want to be as frank as possible when discussing things of a more explicit nature, but my openly stating things in the last video got the entire video destroyed by the algorithm and nobody saw that video. So this time I'm going to be using a few more euphemisms, and I'm not happy about that, but I will indicate when I'm using these euphemisms for adult themed things. Anyways, on to breakfast cereal. I'm not entirely sure about the rest of the world, but in North America, breakfast cereal is kind of like a cultural monolith. I think most people around a millennial age would agree with me that breakfast cereals in our childhoods were a huge thing. They have entire aisles in grocery stores dedicated to them, and at least in my TV watching experience as a child, I feel like breakfast cereals were the second most thing advertised, behind toys, of course.
The North American house hippo is found throughout Canada and the eastern United States.
Like a muffin or a bee.
Like a muffin or a bee.
Teases her most from her head to her toes. What's your thing? Bugs.
I can put my arm back on. You can't.
And they came with these jingles that are even stuck in my head to this day. Like, for example, Lucky Charms. Oh, Lucky Charms. They had a jingle that would tell you all of the different marshmallows in the cereal. So, Hard Stars, Horseshoes, Clovers, and Blue Moons, Pots of Gold. Yeah, I guess the recession has been hitting Lucky Charms. Pots of Gold have been replaced by unicorn meat, it seems. Pots of gold and rainbows and a red balloon. Stuck in my head. I haven't thought about this jingle for years and years, but this stupid
Hard Stars, Horseshoes, Clovers, and Blue Moons, Pots of Gold and Rainbows, and a red balloon.
It's like stuck in my head to this day. So breakfast was sold to us as being the most important meal of the day, and that if you skipped breakfast in the morning, you would essentially cease to function halfway through your day. Which is kind of ironic because I feel like most of these breakfast cereals are probably not the best thing to fuel your body. I mean, they taste delicious, but it's probably closer to candy or dessert than like a healthy thing. And that's why many of the commercials would say that the cereal was part of a balanced breakfast. And they would show like, you need to have a bowl of cereal along with some fruits and other things, I guess. But I think I'm not alone in saying that as a child, I would be constantly eating for breakfast just a bowl of cereal, maybe some orange juice. Not probably the best way or the healthiest way to start your day. So I want to talk about the history of cereal. However, before we get into the history, I want to throw out a little disclaimer in that at the time that cereal was being invented, nutritional information was kind of in its infancy. And so I am going to be making fun of a lot of the things that people believe here, but most of them were going off the best information that they had at the time. And so maybe I'm going to be a little bit unfair to these people. Yes, I'm still going to be making fun of them, but I want to acknowledge that they were doing their best. I mean, even today, people have the entirety of human knowledge at their fingertips, and they're still coming up with some very colorful ideas of what constitutes nutritional and not nutritional information. Also, as a final disclaimer, I want to say I'm not a nutritional scientist, I'm not a nutritionist, so don't try any of this at home. So apparently the birth of cereal can be traced back to 1863 in New York to its inventor, Dr. James Caleb Jackson, who, oh God, I don't know why he looks like Bagul, but okay. His original recipe contained graham flour, which is a more coarsely ground flour, as opposed to the finely ground flour that we see today. This flour was mixed with water and baked into nugget shapes, and I guess the entire recipe is just water and flour? Apparently his nuggets were so hard that they needed to be soaked in milk before you could eat them. And now, I don't know how much baking you've done before, but to me it sounds like he messed up a recipe, but instead of trying something different, he kind of just went with it for some reason. So he decided to market this food as a health product. And in the interest of science, I also I made my own. So this is what I came up with. This is flour and water. Is this ASMR? Am I supposed to do this? This is not good. This is not a health product. This is not good. Actually, it's not that bad. Actually, I could finish eating that. So a little history on Dr. Jackson. He was born not a doctor in 1811 in New York. So Jackson seemed to be a very determined person. He seemed to grab onto a cause and kind of just go with it very passionately. So for a long time, he was a part of the anti-slavery movement. Despite the fact that he was so driven, his immune system did not have the same strength of character. My God, can we say that? It's a bit rude. So he had suffered from poor health all throughout his life, and it wasn't until he would experience a miraculous recovery in a treatment that involves spring water that he decided that this was his new cause to promote. So before we move on, I want to talk about water cures a little bit. There isn't any record that I could find of what kind of water cure exactly Dr. James Caleb Jackson received. Water cures can run the gamut from being given advice to take warm baths or to drink more water to the more extreme versions of dunking the mentally ill into tanks of water, or what I've written here as extreme douching. I don't... I'm kind of glad I don't live in a time where you would go to the doctor and he would be like, you need a bath, but okay. At the time, water cures were believed by some, not many, and not apparently by the medical establishment, to be able to cure things from hiccups to cancer. So drink some water, I guess. To me, it sounds like a person would be very sick, very ill, and they would go for a relaxing day in a hot spring and drinking tea. And then they would feel better after that. And it kind of makes sense that people would believe in these water cures, because who wouldn't? And because this is all very bizarre, I think it's very important for us to set the scene and to kind of realize how the medical landscape was at this time in the early 1800s. And this age of medicine is a time of some very let's say interesting beliefs. So Dr. Jackson's time was a little bit before germ theory became widely accepted in the 1880s. And so the early 1800s were an interesting time for medicine. So I was going to do a quick aside and just throw out a random one or two medical practices that occurred in the 1800s, but I kind of fell into a rabbit hole, and so we're going to be doing the top 10 list of medical practices that occurred during the 19th century. These are not the most standard, these are just the ones I found the most interesting or the strangest. First, before we start, a few caveats. Not all of these medical practices are just confined to this time period, and they are not all believed universally. And small trigger warning for some medical gore and some kind of poor treatment of animals. So our number 10 is the humorous theory. Despite the fact that this theory may seem ridiculous, it was not called the humorous theory due to its comedic value. It was postulated by the ancient Greeks, and it persisted until the middle of the 19th century, until people got too woke and started using science instead of whatever this is. Although it was falling out of favor in Jackson's time, it was still widely believed by many doctors. So the idea behind the humorous theory is that the human body contains 4 substances. They are blood, yellow bile, black bile, and phlegm. And now phlegm is different from the phlegm that we think of today. It's kind of a more generalized term that encompasses any clear or white fluids that come from the body, like mucus, pus, or sweat. But if you know me well enough, you know that I would research into whether the liquid we're both thinking of, right? We're both thinking that liquid was also considered to be part of phlegm. And so of course I researched it, and no, man liquid, I don't like to say that. Man juice? No, that's bad too. Baby juice is a mixture of all 4 of the humors. It's not part of phlegm. And so I just think that what I'm trying to say here is that, can I say cum? I don't know what to say. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that baby batter is kind of like the avatar of all 4 of your humors working together. So the main idea behind humorous theory is that any illness in the human body is caused by an imbalance of your humors. So if you were sick, the doctor might give you some medicine that help you to throw up and decrease the level of bile in your body, or perhaps he would say you have too much blood in your body and I guess cut you in a way that would help you to bleed out your extra blood. And speaking of extra blood, number 9, we have blood transfusions. So before any medical personnel knew about blood types, they just kind of threw anything they could into people's veins and hoping they would find something that worked. Among these experiments, there were a few successful ones, like one in 1865 where a doctor drained a lot of the blood from a small dog and then took the blood from a larger dog and put that blood into the smaller dog. The larger dog died, but the smaller one did survive. So it's a glass half full, dog half full scenario, I guess. Another doctor in 1866 tried to give a teenager suffering from what he called an obscure disease of the blood of a lamb, I guess thinking that his disease was causing him to like rage up. And so he would give him the blood of a calm lamb, and that would make him calm down. It would calm down the disease. A further experiment saw a doctor giving a person who is suffering from a disease that may have been syphilis the blood of a baby cow in order to heal his disease. I'm guessing it's the same as the lamb thing, where like his raging disease needed to be calmed down by a baby lamb. So I guess whatever syphilis is the opposite of a baby cow. However, the cow didn't work, as after his second transfusion, he peed a black liquid and then promptly died. And now we can laugh at these things. Of course, it's very funny, but you know, these people were pioneering the way for us to have the successful blood transfusions that we have today. So I think we do need to honor them somewhat. Our number 8 is mercury. So speaking of syphilis and other STIs, mercury was often used as a cure for these. So for using mercury, you can rub it into your sores, you can inhale it, you can squirt it up your anatomy, and it does have the small side effect of causing painful cramping, vomiting, and diarrhea, but that just means it's working, so keep going. Well, actually, apparently mercury is very dangerous and many people died. There's even a disease caused by mercury that was commonly found in hatters, people who make hats. And this is where we get Alice in Wonderland's Mad Hatter from. So the symptoms of this disease include tremors, anxiety, pathological shyness, and frequent sighing. And number 8, we did blood transfusions, but there are also milk transfusions. So I guess at some point the doctors didn't have any blood lying around, so they thought just use milk. So I think the logic is there, like babies need milk to survive, it's full of vitamins, it's healthy for your body, it comes from people, so it's pretty much just the same as blood. It's like white blood. And this was first carried out in Toronto, Canada. Yay, Canada. So the first time they did this, the patients seemed to get better, and then the next 5 times they tried, all of them died. And despite this, it became a little bit popular, although most patients who did undergo a milk transfusion did either go into a coma or die. Experiments into this also included bleeding dogs until they were nearly dead and then trying to replace their blood with milk, and those were not very successful, and all the dogs died. Number 6 is smoke enemas, and no, I am not blowing smoke up your ass. Blowing smoke up your ass was actually a legitimate medical treatment carried out by some Native American tribes in North America. So Native Americans would use tobacco as a kind of medicine. So to treat people who were drowning or had hernias, apparently some doctors would use either smoke or liquid tobacco and put it up your butt. So there is actually some logic to this, in that putting the tobacco up there might stimulate the vagus nerve and cause some patients to become resuscitated. There was one case that I read about while researching this where there was a woman who was sentenced to death because she was determined to have killed her stillborn child, which is horrible, I'm sorry. And so they sentenced her to death. So after hanging this woman, they found out that she was still alive. And so what did they do? Well, first they made her chug a cordial being a mix of alcohol, spices, and herbs, according to some sources. They rubbed her arms and legs. They put warm packs all over her body, and they gave her a smoke enema. And then they asked another woman to be, I guess, her little spoon and kind of spoon her as she resuscitated. After all of these treatments, she sprung back to life and was pardoned from her crime. This is some peak logic where, like, if people try to kill you and you don't die, I guess you weren't guilty of the crime after all. Number 5 is a dead whale. This is an Australian one, and this is a kind of nice callback to our previous video about John Lilly. So this is not a widely spread treatment, but maybe just a thing that a few people had done. So apparently this comes from a story of a man who was very drunk one night, and he was waltzing down the beach with his mates, and he decided that it would be a good laugh to just jump into the carcass of a dead whale. So he jumped into the dead whale in an attempt to impress his friends. His friends were either too unwilling or too repulsed to help him out of the dead whale. And so when he emerged, he said that he was completely sober and his rheumatoid arthritis had been cured. So some other people started to cut holes in dead whales and stay in there for up to 30 hours in order to cure various ailments. Australia. Number 4 is cocaine. So cocaine apparently was used to treat a variety of things such as hay fever. It was used as a local anesthetic as well as treatment for morphine addiction, which I guess if you're gonna try a new drug, trade up, sure. So apparently cocaine was sold mixed with wine, and it was reputed to be able to suppress your appetite, relieve pain, and treat anemia. That is one thing you will find with this medical history. A lot of medicines were used to treat like a huge variety of things. Nothing was ever just for one thing. It was also believed that this wine and cocaine mixture was what inspired the creator of Coca-Cola to create Coca-Cola. At number 3, we have heroin. So speaking of morphine, heroin was created to be 5 times more effective and less addictive than morphine. They even had aspirin with heroin for children. It was so popular that they couldn't keep it on the shelves. Oh wait. So maybe it isn't so non-addictive. Celebrities like Philip Seymour Hoffman, Janis Joplin, Jim Morrison, River Phoenix, John Belushi, Sid Vicious, and Chris Farley would probably have some things to say about this. And, you know, opioids like morphine, heroin, laudanum, fentanyl, and other things never caused another problem in society. We all live very happily now. Number 2 is snake oil. So apparently this comes from Chinese traditional medicine, where there is an oil that is obtained from Chinese water snakes that is said to be able to decrease inflammation and treat other conditions like arthritis and bursitis. So when a lot of Chinese immigrants were moving to North America to help build the Transcontinental Railroad, they also brought some of their Chinese traditional medicines with them. So this oil is reportedly very high in oh my god, I cannot say this word.
I said, well, let's see how we say that.
Eicosapentaenoic acid, which is 1-omega-3 acid. It is believed to have some actual effectiveness. So would it surprise you to learn that white people, seeing the Chinese people using this very effective medicine, would start to boil rattlesnakes and take the oil that came off the top and sell this as medicine to treat things from headache to kidney diseases to lady problems, and that it wasn't actually effective because it didn't have the same active ingredient, that same omega-3 oil that the actual Chinese snake oil had. So this whole action led the term snake oil going from a reputable medicine to what is now known as today, which is a scam medicine. And number one, the top of our list, is hysteria. So hysteria is believing that women are irrational creatures, prone to hysteria or becoming crazy due to the nature of their reproductive organs. The words hysterical and hysteria actually even come from the Greek word to mean uterus, so there's that. Hysteria was used as a medical term to encompass a variety of woman problems. The prevailing theory from Plato was that if a woman were to never have children, her uterus would suffer a midlife crisis and begin wandering about her body, causing all sorts of medical ailments. So, the treatment, of course, is you want to coax the uterus back from wherever it's causing a problem, back down to this area, and perhaps fix the problem. So, what you want to do is make the uterus's actual home a very comfortable place for the uterus to be, so you can massage it back into place, tidy up the area, make it more exciting for the uterus to return. So apparently before the invention of the vibrator, some doctors would shoot jets of water between women's legs, like I guess in a similar manner to those carnival games where you have a water gun shooting in the clown's mouth. The women who underwent this treatment would report a very satisfying sensation, much like a champagne buzz. As the 19th century was the time of the Industrial Revolution, it's no surprise that the fifth home electronic device was the personal massager. And this is possibly because doing it acoustically was quite difficult for the doctors. And apparently, reportedly, allegedly, some women would also fake the symptoms of hysteria in order to get this kind of treatment. And can you blame them? However, unfortunately, as these vibrational tools gained kind of more widestream acceptance, they kind of etched into the adult film industry and were kind of seen as more dirty and less clinical, and so they fell out of medical usage. And women were never mistreated by the medical establishment again. Another interesting fact about the 1800s medical landscape is that this was a time where people had difficulty accessing cadavers, and so there was kind of an underground industry of grave robbing and selling the corpses you stole to medical establishments.
I'm not. He isn't? Well, he will be soon. He's very ill. I'm getting better. No, you're not. You'll be stone dead in a moment.
However, in contrast to all this ridiculousness that we just talked about, there were some fantastic medical discoveries. Penicillin, aspirin, and insulin were all discovered at this time, so it wasn't all what are now illicit drugs and milk transfusions. But all that is to say, there were some very, very odd beliefs at this time. Now let's get back to Dr. James Caleb Jackson, the inventor of cereal. After experiencing his miraculous recovery after a lifelong of suffering from illness from a water treatment, Jackson began to advocate for this style of medical treatment. As I said, he was quite a driven man, and so he opened his very own health spa, Glen Haven Water Cure, in 1847. These health spas seem cushy as hell. You would pay a lot of money, and in return you would not be offered much or even any medicine. Some institutions even said that medicine was counterproductive or could be harmful to the health. However, what you could do there was go and relax. They would have summertime activities such as rowing and fishing, and wintertime activities such as skating or sleighing in the winter. Basically, it seemed like a summer camp for rich white adults to sleep off their laudanum addiction. So Dr. Jackson really strongly believed that water was one of the keys to wellness. He also strongly believed that diet could influence your health. So Dr. James Caleb Jackson became a vegetarian. He stopped drinking caffeine and alcohol. He stopped smoking, etc. In addition to these healthier practices, he also started to focus on what he called pure foods. He believed that his diet could cure many things. Most specifically, he thought his diet could cure various health ailments chiefly, poor impulse control, and stopping people from bashing the bishop, slapping the sergeant, jerking the gherkin. you know? So the theory behind this idea is credited to a man called Sylvester Graham, whose invention, graham crackers, are much more well known than he is. So the theory behind this is that spicy foods, once you consume them, increase your libido. They excite your insides and cause you to get excited. In your pants?
That's right. In my pants.
And so this theory is kind of the same reason why I've been recently snorting a mixture of rosemary and cayenne pepper before I go on dates. So his idea is that if spicy foods excite you and make your libido go crazy, then of course a diet of bland foods would calm your libido and stop you from having these urges. Thus, your critical s'more ingredient, the original graham crackers, were invented as a libido-limiting liniment. Okay, I know a liniment is a medication that is applied to your skin and it doesn't quite work here, but I really wanted to go for the alliteration. I'm sorry, I know it's not good. What also was not good were the original graham crackers, which had neither sugar nor spice nor chemical X as the graham crackers of today do. But they were sold as a way to suppress sexual psoriasis. Okay, I'll stop. Let's talk about Sylvester Graham for a moment. So he was born in Connecticut and he had quite a rough childhood where he saw the negative effects of alcohol and alcoholism in the adults around him, which led him to believe that alcohol is kind of not very good, which was kind of a niche view at the time. Like Dr. Jackson, Sylvester Graham suffered from poor health as a child. He became a minister in his late 20s and then would leave this field at age 36, become a vegetarian, and began practicing and preaching health. So around this time, there was a huge outbreak of cholera in Europe. Americans believed that in order to avoid this disease, which they saw as a punishment from God,
good idea, oh Lord.
Of course it's a good idea.
they needed to eat more meat, drink lots of port wine, which was kind of a smart choice because it was a more safe alternative to their drinking water. And also, surprisingly, port wine has a lot of antioxidants, but they didn't know what those were. So in addition to eating as much meat as possible and drinking as much wine as possible, they were also urged to avoid eating vegetables, and that's just very good. You're doing a really good job. So vegetarian for Graham was, like most of his beliefs, informed by religion, where he thought that in the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve ate a mostly natural plant-based diet, and eating plants never caused any problems for Adam or Eve. And so he thought that humans should probably do the same. It was as God intended. So Sylvester Graham advocated that food should be as free of extra additives as possible. And this advice is very valid and becomes even more valid when you learn that at this time in history, a lot of bakers were kind of stretching things out by adding some questionable things to their breads, such as alum, which is a hydrated double sulfate of aluminum and potassium used in things like fabric dyes, pickling vegetables, baking powder, and fire extinguishers. Other bakers would use things like chalk or plaster of Paris.
It's the new that's hot.
Which don't sound so healthy to consume. So he thought that these additives, along with the spices that you might find in different foods, could stimulate our internal system and cause some problems. He also believed that shaking hands with the one-eyed milkman and being a promiscuous girl were things that were super bad, like you will get pregnant and die bad. By espousing the merits of vegetarianism and demonizing the additive-laden bread at the time in his rallies, where he was said to be quite a persuasive speaker, Sylvester Graham had really pissed off the butchers and the bakers of his time. No word on what the candlestick makers thought about this whole scenario.
Please clap.
A little side note here is that I looked up the origin of the rub-a-dub-dub nursery rhyme, and apparently it was a way to shame men who would go to this carnival attraction that was essentially some kind of early peep show. So I'm really glad my grandmother taught me that song as a child. So Sylvester Graham's rallies were quite controversial at the time. He had one called A Lecture to Mothers, which he delivered thrice, and every time he delivered it, it ended in a riot. So what was so controversial about this was he talked to a group of women about reproductive anatomy and equal rights between men and women. The men who were barred entry from this event, I guess, assumed that Sylvester Graham was kind of seducing these women, like some kind of reverse Pied Piper. Seducing people with scientific talk about these weird, salacious matters is kind of my domain, so I'm getting a little bit jealous here. So let's leave Sylvester Graham behind. However, there is one person that Sylvester Graham did manage to seduce, and that is Dr. James Caleb Jackson. Not like seduce. I'm not writing fan fiction here yet, but let's get back to Dr. James Caleb Jackson. So after Dr. James Caleb Jackson received his miraculous water cure in either 1846 or 1847, he became a physician. In 1858, Dr. Jackson would take over a spa called Our Home Hygienic Institute in New York, and that spa became remarkably successful, like one of the most successful health spas in the world successful. And he would rename this spa Our Home on the Hillside, which gets my horror senses tingling. It's a cure for wellness. So Dr. James Caleb Jackson would invent his granula in 1863. That is the mixture of graham flour and water. And okay, I would be remiss if I were not to mention there was an Atlas Obscura article that theorized that Jackson's wife, Lucretia Edgerton Brewster, was actually the brains behind his invention, but we really cannot be sure. But they did serve this granula to the patients at the sanatorium. In 1878, a man named John Harvey Kellogg would visit Our Home on the Hillside. After his visit, he would return back to his own health spa, and he would promptly develop his own hard cereal.
That's suspicious.
And he would also call this hard cereal granula. He would later be sued by Dr. Jackson and be forced to change the name of his granula. So he changed it from granula to granola. What? Changing one letter makes it legally distinct? So you're telling me I could create a character called Minky Mouse and have it legally be distinct from Mickey Mouse? Was the law that different back then? In whatever case, the granola he made at that time was much different from the granola that we have today. And this granola that he made was actually kind of a precursor to cornflakes. So in this part of the story, we bid adieu to Dr. James Caleb Jackson and say hello to and say hello to John Harvey Kellogg. Why does he look like the snowman from Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer? Was he modeled off of... No. Wait a minute. Okay. Sam the Snowman was designed to look and sound like the actor who voiced him, Burl Ives, with his trademark beard, girth, and voice. Girth? Okay. So, much like a box of Lucky Charms, John Harvey Kellogg is a bit of a mixed bag. And yes, I know that Lucky Charms are a General Mills product and not a Kellogg product, but I'm doing this out of irony and maybe a little bit of disdain. Oh my god, there's so many rainbows. Why is there only rainbows? This is not good. There's only 3 colors in this ring. Oh no. So with Lucky Charms, you get the tasty marshmallows, which will be the fun facts about John Harvey Kellogg. One fun fact being that John Harvey Kellogg did believe, as Dr. James Caleb Jackson did, that a good diet could prevent a ménage à moi. That being said, along with the fun facts, the marshmallow bits, you also get the plain oat bits, which are the terrible facts about John Harvey Kellogg, such as the fact that he promoted racial segregation. So 2 years before John Harvey Kellogg would attend Dr. Jackson's Our Home on the Hillside Spa, John Harvey Kellogg became the Super Nintendo of the Seventh-day Adventist Western Health Reform Institute. Long title. Which he later would rename to the much shorter but much more confrontational Battle Creek Sanitarium. A small side note being that he created the word sanitarium from the word sanatorium. Good job, John. That's very good. Very creative. This being the second time that he took something else that somebody made and said, I made this. Wikipedia also says that the Battle Creek Sanitarium was also nicknamed the San. I'm not saying that.
Stop trying to make
the San
happen. It's not going to happen.
Typically, the sanitarium would cater to the wealthy and powerful, people like Henry Ford and Thomas Edison, we'll get to you eventually, and Amelia Earhart. But to Kellogg's credit, he also did look after the poor people and gave them equal treatment. That's it. That's a marshmallow. So Granula and Granola, these foods were possibly modeled after the unleavened breads found in many religious texts. Much like Sylvester Graham getting his dietary ideas from the Bible, which I would not recommend using the Bible for any sort of dietary guideline. However, the Jewish religion does state that eating unleavened bread is a way to remove sin and kind of represents purity. So it isn't so surprising that Dr. Jackson and Kellogg both came to the conclusion that these foods were very healthy. Where leavened bread or bread that has risen has been filled with sin in order to achieve this level of poofiness. Like Jackson, Kellogg also promoted a vegetarian diet that was free from smoking or drinking, and he urged his patients to get out in the sun and do some sunbathing. Both men were a little bit different than other doctors at the time, who just kind of thought of treating diseases after they had occurred, whereas Kellogg and Jackson both thought prevention was the best medicine. Kellogg was a little bit different than Jackson, however, as he did believe in germ theory, and he also did think that your gut flora, the bacteria in your intestines, can really strongly influence your health. And this is kind of like a breath of fresh air or an IV of fresh milk to your bloodstream after all these crazy medical misbeliefs. And speaking of milk, he also believed in consuming yogurt as part of a healthy diet. But the odd thing about that was he thought that you should eat half of it and the other half should go in the other way. So bend over, I guess. But no, this is actually true. He did believe in yogurt enemas. I spilled yogurt on myself. He did like enemas as a medical treatment, and he even invented a machine that was capable of enemaing, shooting you full of 14 liters of water. I'm not sure what in the sonic belly inflation media this is about, but I don't think 14 liters of water is possible. For comparison, the average douchebag can hold about 120 to 180 milliliters of water. That would mean if your douche is on the larger size, you would have to fill it up about 78 times and empty it into yourself to attain the same amount. And baby, we are back. We are into the crazy beliefs again. Let's go. The next crazy belief is one that I actually came up with as a child as well. And that idea was when I had eaten so much food and I was very full, I would excuse myself from the table and I would jump up and down until the food had moved further down into my digestive system. And so Kellogg kind of had a similar thought where he thought that people are backed up with food, so he invented a chair that would shake patients like a British nanny. I looked up what this shaking people like a British nanny thing was because I found it on Family Guy, but I think this story is already full enough of terrible people, so let's not get into that. Anyways, yeah, he had a vibrating chair that would shake patients so violently in an attempt to dislodge toxins from their body and increase oxygen in the body. I guess if you're desperately gasping for air while you're being shaken violently, it kind of makes sense that your body would go into a full panic and evacuate everything, and you may happen to...
I just shipped my pants, and it's very convenient.
Very convenient.
Yeah. But wait, there's more. He also invented a slapping machine, and the idea was that slapping would stimulate the muscles and nerves. And I think I've seen some like elderly people doing this before, like repeatedly hitting themselves, so maybe there's some logic behind this one. The machine kind of looks like one of those car wash things, and I was expecting maybe something a little bit kinkier, but oh well. Speaking of kinky, Kellogg also disassembled a telephone and turned it into a machine that was used to shock patients. So he thought this could cure things like lead poisoning or to prevent you from being fat. Also, if he shocked you on the eyeballs, he thought it could cure many vision disorders. He also believed, as was inspired by his mentor Horace Fletcher, that food should be chewed excessively before it is swallowed. Apparently, at the Battle Creek Sanatorium, Kellogg would lead dinners with a chant of the chewing song, which apparently went something like, chew, chew, chew.
Chew, 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 that is the thing to do. Chew, 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 good food is good for you.
At least according to a movie called The Road to Wellville that was about Kellogg. So let's get into Horace Fletcher a little bit. He became a wealthy man by importing Japanese curios to San Francisco, where he became quite wealthy. And so he lived the high life for many years, but he got a little bit fat, and so a shock came to him when he was refused insurance coverage by his insurance broker for the fact that he was morbidly obese at 217 pounds. This shock led him to create some lifestyle changes. So one of those lifestyle changes was he began to chew his food excessively before swallowing it. Now this is actually a valid strategy for losing weight, not because the food is partially digested in your mouth before swallowing, as he thought, but actually chewing food for a long time will decrease levels of ghrelin, which stimulate hunger, and increase levels of the neurotransmitter leptin, which stimulates satiety. That being said, I don't think I would really recommend this strategy. It kind of takes a lot of the pleasure out of eating. But to Horace, different foods require different amounts of chewing. It might be a little bit, it might be a lot. And due to this habit, he was nicknamed the Great Masticator.
Do I what?
Masticate? You're not a follower of Horace Fletcher?
Fletcherize.
And so now he became a little bit famous now that he was freed from the fat that was previously holding him back, and he went about demonstrating his newfound athletic abilities all around the country. He attributed all of his success to over chewing his food, and he was very spry for his age at this time. In one such demonstration at Yale University, he, at the age of 58, outperformed athletes in various feats such as calf raises, where he reportedly performed 350 reps of 350 pounds with his right calf, deep knee bending, and holding his arms out horizontally for a long time.
I'll cheat a little bit.
Yes!
During this Yale trip, he would also apparently get the contact information of some scientists at Yale, and allegedly, in an attempt to get them to join his mastication movement, apparently, according to some sources, he mailed one of these scientists a box that was full of his poop. So he was very proud of his poop, and he said that it should be coming out dry and odorless, which doesn't sound pleasant. He would die from bronchitis at the age of 69.
Ain't nobody got time for that.
He would also write this bar: "History will castigate those who do not masticate." Fire. And now back to Kellogg. And speaking of mastication, no, not mastication. A ménage à moi. Before we get into this, I just want to say that manhandling the ham candle is very normal and healthy. We shouldn't be ashamed of doing this, and you are making love to the most important person in your life, and so on. Kellogg, however, believed that doing a load by hand is a vile practice, and as a health practitioner, it was his job to stop people from doing this. So some of his treatments that were aimed at stopping patients from holding the bald man hostage involve binding the hands of his patients or putting a cage around their genitals. And come on, that doesn't help. That doesn't stop people from doing that. That just might encourage them more. When those didn't work, and my research and extensive field work both lead me to believe that they wouldn't, Kellogg believed in administering circumcision without anesthesia. Oh, and in case you're in favor of male circumcision, and yes, there can be medical justification or religious justification for this, he also believed in performing a similar treatment on girls, applying carbonic acid to their anatomy and surgical removal. So yeah, he was also in favor of female circumcision. So he would promote these interventions as a way to stop young people from taking their talents to South Beach in order to increase their impulse control and improve their health. Given modern research, we know that this is the opposite of what is true, and there are a bunch of positive effects from shaking hands with the one-eyed milkman, but I don't need to convince you about this, right? While some sources stated that Kellogg was responsible for the high rates of male circumcision in North America, I don't know if it was actually him. I do think he had an effect on it, but I don't think he was the main driver behind the high rates. Okay, that got a little bit dark, and I think we need a little Lucky Charms marshmallow to cleanse our palate. So the fun fact about Kellogg is that when he was treating patients in the clinic, sometimes he walked around with a cockatoo on his shoulder. It's not working. I'm really bummed out. These facts are really bumming me out. So let's go back to cereal. So yes, granola was a food that was perhaps stolen from Dr. Jackson and given to people in an effort to stop people from going number 3. I don't like that one. From paddling the pink canoe. But it was kind of an awesome product because at this time it was very difficult for Americans to make breakfast or have breakfast readily available. The typical American breakfast at this time for upper class people included meat and eggs and maybe some kind of carb like pancakes or cornbread, and for lower class people maybe breads and porridge. And now this is not the same porridge that you might be thinking of. This is whole grain porridge, so this has to be boiled for hours and hours before it is palatable enough to eat. And also, before you even do that, you need to start a fire. So it was a really inconvenient time to be living your life, which kind of makes sense why doctors were prescribing warm baths and drinking water as a way to cure illnesses. At this point, I need to introduce John Harvey Kellogg's brother, Will Kellogg. Now, where John wanted to treat patients in ways that we had already described, Will was more on the business side of things, and he saw that there was an untapped market for breakfast food that provided convenience to the American people. In their family, John was kind of seen as the golden child. He was seen as very intelligent and was even handpicked by members of his church to attend medical school. And Will, on the other hand, his family kind of thought he was stupid, and he was constantly picked on by John, who was 8 years older than him. At the age of 20, Will was hired by John to run things on the business end of the Battle Creek Sanitarium, where John did not let Will have an office. He forced Will to follow him around, taking notes, including when he was riding on a bicycle or even when he went into the bathroom. I don't know what was wrong with this man. Apparently, they also began to develop cereals by serving patients whole wheat double-baked Zwieback?
How to pronounce?
Just say it.
Zwieback.
Twice-baked Zwieback biscuits. Zwieback being the German word meaning twice baked. Grinding these breads up gets us the product that Kellogg called granola. All that grinding was tough work though, and there had to be an easier way.
Finally, there's a better way.
Apparently they had a breakthrough in 1894 when they stumbled upon a way to make wheat flakes, which they called granose. And I have to believe that it was John that came up with this. It's just not creative at all. So the stories vary a lot for how this was made, but some of the stories say that they had left cooked wheat out so long that it had fermented or became a little moldy, and instead of throwing it out, they just baked it again, and then that had broken it down and made it palatable enough to chew. John Harvey Kellogg and Will Kellogg remained steadfast in their lanes, where John just wanted to treat patients. Will, on the other hand, turned out to be some kind of marketing and business wizard. So Will saw some potential in these tasty flakes, and I guess I shouldn't really call them tasty flakes as they didn't have any sugar in them. They were a pure health product. So Will, not being as motivated by health as his brother John, decided to add some sugar, which, thank you. So in 1905, Will offered to buy his brother out, and John Harvey Kellogg, being ankle deep in debt and really only caring about the medical side, agreed. In 1906, Will created the Battle Creek Toasted Corn Flake Company, and this company became quite successful, even among the very competitive field of breakfast cereal barons at the time. Will strongly believed in advertising his cereals thoroughly and spent a lot of money and time to do this. So apparently they had one advertising campaign where you would wink at your grocer in order to see what you would get. And now what you would get was a sample of cornflakes, whereas when I wink at my grocers, all I get is escorted off the premises by security. So with all this money being thrown into advertising, it should come as no surprise that Will Kellogg was very protective of his brand. So when John Harvey Kellogg saw that Will was achieving success with a product that I guess he thought he believed he owned, which is dubious, but whatever. Apparently a big sticking point for John was that Will Kellogg put on his boxes of cereal a big loopy red signature, WK Kellogg. So John Harvey thought that their signatures were very similar. So John Harvey, like any bitter, spiteful sibling, was like, it's not my fault you're so in love with me. So he began to sell his own cereal out of spite or jealousy, or perhaps because he thought that his little brother was copying him. Like, how dare he steal the product that he put so much effort into stealing from somebody else. It's like those people that are constantly accusing their significant others of cheating when they're actually the ones who are cheating in the relationship. So John Harvey Kellogg founded the Kellogg Toasted Cornflake Company in 1908 and was essentially selling the same products as Will Kellogg. So Will, of course, having bought his brother out and fearing that his brother's unsweetened and maybe unpalatable cereals might dilute the Kellogg brand, went after his brother legally and had him served an injunction. An injunction is kind of a more legally enforceable cease and desist letter. So what would follow was a decade of legal battles and petty infighting, which had the satisfying result of John Harvey Kellogg having to pay the legal fees and also having to give Will Kellogg all the profits from the cereal he had sold in the past 10 years, and also not being able to write his name in large letters on his boxes of cereal, only little teeny letters. So unfortunately, all of these legal battles turned Will Kellogg into a bitter and resentful shell of the man he had used to be. Some sources said that it caused his family and familial relationships to fall apart, although this is only according to some sources. I couldn't find this universally. Others stated that he was quite the philanthropist and he would dedicate a lot of time and money to worthy causes. Although to counter this, one account of his grandsons apparently described Will Kellogg's death to be a relief, which, ouch. Both brothers never reconciled, although apparently later in his life, John Harvey Kellogg would write a very impassioned letter to his brother Will, hoping to kind of mend their broken relationship. Apparently, John Harvey wanted to tell Will that he had been right about all the business matters and that he wanted them to mend before they met their end. Ooh, look at me, I'm like a regular Horace Fletcher. So he gave this letter to his secretary with the express instructions that it be delivered to Will. The secretary read this letter and decided that it made John Harvey look weak, and the secretary filed the letter away and it was never delivered. So John Harvey would die 2 years later, assuming that his brother read the letter and just didn't want to reconcile with him. The audacity of that secretary. You cannot trust a secretary. And speaking of secretaries, I swear this is a very good segue once we get to the end of this story. But I want to talk a little bit about Post. Charles William Post. So Post being the man behind such iconically bland cereals as Grape Nuts, which don't have grapes in them but are named for the way they smelled once they were being baked, Raisin Bran and Shreddies. Okay, they did have some hits like Fruity Pebbles and I guess Oreo O's, but anyways, let's look at the man behind these cereals. So Charles William Post would visit Battle Creek Sanitarium in the late 1980s after two mental breakdowns, one in 1885 and one in 1891. He visited Kellogg's Sanitarium in 1891. During his stay, he asked if he could please see the kitchen and please see how they made something they called caramel coffee, which was a coffee substitute. After this, he would leave and miraculously come up with his own recipe for caramel coffee. Suspicious. So apparently Charles William Post, being a shrewd businessman, jumped through the legal loophole that John and Will had never trademarked their caramel coffee, so it was not wrong to steal it from them. So a little bit more history on Charles William Post. He got married at the age of 20 to Ella Letitia Merriweather. Together they had one child named Marjorie. However, after becoming involved in the cereal industry and experiencing great success, he would divorce his wife in 1904 after 30 years of marriage. His wife, who begged him to stay, his wife who cared for him through two mental breakdowns, one of which left him confined to a wheelchair. So 1 month after divorcing his wife, he married his secretary. I told you it was a good segue. Who was half his age and only 10 years older than his daughter. 8 years later, Ella Letitia Merriweather would pass away in her sleep from what her daughter described as a broken heart from her husband leaving her. I'm just astounded by this. This is terrible. All that I want to say about Charles William Post is that grape nuts suck. Alphabets suck. Post himself sucked, and I hope that honeycomb cereal is cutting the roof of your mouth or whatever other orifice it's being shoved into your body in hell. Goodbye. Whew. Anyways, back to the Kellogg brothers. Now, before you feel bad for John Harvey Kellogg at never having reconciled with his younger brother, now we've already been over his I need another term for masturbation. I've run out. Now, we've already been over his flicking the bean rhetoric, but we can go a little bit deeper. So we know that he thought that pocket pool was a very bad thing, but I choked the chicken a little bit. No, wait, I buried the lead a little bit when I was talking about this. So I did tell you that he thought that roughing up the suspect would lead to things like insanity or ugliness.
Sure, Jan.
But what else? So he believed that doing that would lead to a variety of symptoms which ranged from the fairly benign, like fickleness or an inability to make decisions, bashfulness or being shy, boldness, which kind of seems like the opposite thing, and a craving for spicy foods because, you know, nothing complements a good sesh like a bowl of tteokbokki. And it also ranged to the more serious like epilepsy, mood swings, development disabilities, and poor posture, which I guess that one makes sense. Speaking of deeper, how did he feel about these acts between two people? Well, he thought that should only be done for procreative reasons.
What if I want to have sex before I get married?
Well, I guess you just have to be prepared to die.
And fun fact, he was married to his wife Ella for 41 years, and apparently they never once consummated their relationship. So John thought that doing it with his wife would leech away his vital powers. And a fun fact is apparently on their honeymoon, John spent most of his time revising a book that, I'm not even joking, was called The Plain Facts About Sexual Life. That poor woman. So in 1907, John Harvey Kellogg was thrown out of the Seventh-day Adventist Church as a result of creative differences. After this, he became a little racist. I mean, he was already racist. He became mega racist. So apparently John Harvey Kellogg had strong beliefs that people such as alcoholics, criminals, the mentally ill, and what he called feeble-minded people should be prevented from procreating. Along with these people, he thought that people of certain races should also be prevented from procreating. And I'm kind of dancing around this, but I don't think this man deserves any of our empathy or grace. So he was a eugenicist. He thought that white people were both physically and mentally better than other races. He also thought that if you as a white person were to have children with a person from another race, that was betraying your race or diluting your DNA in some way. He also changed the name of the medical board he had founded to the Race Betterment Foundation in 1914. As part of this, he believed that the foods that Americans were eating were also contributing to a dilution of their DNA. So he would preach that by eating a better diet, we could, I guess, make humans great again. Mahuga, I guess. So this Race Betterment Foundation hosted conferences where Kellogg's suggested a eugenics registry, which is, I guess, where white people would make a vow to not have relationships or babies with people from other races, or maybe promise to have more white babies. So some of the articles that I read also stated that these conferences hosted a large eugenics display, and I don't even know what that is. This is getting very heavy, so I need like a handful of marshmallows. It's okay. Oh God. The ironic thing about Kellogg is that while he was a white supremacist, he did actively campaign against segregation in his Battle Creek Sanitarium. He would hire black nurses, and he would treat black patients with the exact same respect that he would treat white patients. I guess it's a step in the right direction, but a step in the right direction doesn't help you when you're falling face first into the wrong direction. Kellogg would later develop Bell's palsy, which would cause half of his face to droop, and so he did as Quasimodo or the Phantom or the Elephant Man did and secluded himself away. However, unlike those who would be considered under the trope of the tragic monster, I feel like Kellogg was just a monster through and through. And then he got bronchitis.
Ain't nobody got...
He died.
Barbecuing.
He would pass away on December 14th, 1943. And now, before you start to feel bad for him, he would leave his entire estate to the Race Betterment Foundation, stating that racial purity was humanity's only hope. So this foundation would persist until 1967, where it died from complications due to mismanagement. And I don't know what happened to that racial supremacy. Shouldn't white people be better at managing business than this? Also, the cherry on top of this is that Kellogg was buried in an all-white suit. So I guess rest in peace, you piece of... Not to support Kellogg in any way or lend any credence to anything he said, but racism at this time was incredibly blatant. Even in the cereal industry. I mean, look at this ad for Corn Kinks. It's just... I cannot. I'm at a loss for words. And wow, we're looking at shocking ads. Let's look at this. Cool, guys, cool. So it's kind of another bummer ending for us. At least Will became a philanthropist, forming the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, which focuses on giving every child an equal opportunity, racial equity, and teaching children about healthy teeth, which is a hell of a lot better than his brother did. Also, one more nice fact about Will. In 1909, the Kellogg's company also provided the very first cereal box prize. Now, it wasn't included in the cereal, but if you bought 2 boxes of cereal, you would get something called the Funny Jungleland Moving Pictures booklet. If you do not know about cereal prizes, it's like half of the reason that people were excited about cereal when I was growing up. So many kinds of cereal would have a toy or something in the bag that you would get. And so you were kind of just waiting for the next box of cereal to get your next toy. Some of the boxes of cereal even had full-on CD computer games in them, so that was awesome. In retrospect, I don't think the games were very fun. I think it was like Monopoly, Operation, and Clue, but I don't know. We were kids. We didn't have that much to entertain us. It was General Mills that came out with these computer games packed into cereal boxes, so I guess it's fitting that this is the last cereal company that we will talk about. And it's the cereal that I've been eating the whole time. Oh my god, so many rainbows. So the General Mills company would take Kellogg's idea of a prize for buying cereal and kind of take it to the next level. They included these collectible trading cards called Skippy cards. There was 12 different cards and you get one in your box of cereal. So I feel like they really took it to the next level. At the risk of sounding like I'm shilling for the General Mills company as I hug my box of Lucky Charms. Any kind of research I did on them, nobody came back dirty. Like, not as bad as Post or John Harvey Kellogg. And so I found most of the people involved in the story of General Mills to have fairly clean backgrounds, or at least well-hidden ones. So General Mills for the win. The only negative thing I could find about General Mills is that one of their factories did explode due to a dust explosion. A dust explosion is when there's lots of little particles in the air, so it's very easy for a single spark to create a big explosion. In this explosion, 18 people were killed, and a subsequent fire was caused that killed 4 more people. There was also one more controversy. In 2022, some contaminated boxes of Lucky Charms caused a lot of people to have very explosive diarrhea and crap.